The marble floors of the Georgia State Capitol gleamed under the afternoon sun, streaming through tall windows as Officer Sarah Collins adjusted her tactical vest and checked her radio one final time. Beside her, Max sat at perfect attention, his black tactical harness reflecting the polished brass fixtures of the historic building. The Belgian Malinois' ears twitched at every sound, footsteps echoing down corridors, the distant murmur of legislators preparing for the afternoon session, the mechanical hum of the building's ventilation system. "Special assignment today, boy," Sarah murmured, running her fingers through Max's thick coat. "High-profile security detail. We need to be invisible." Max's dark eyes met hers, and she saw the familiar intelligence that had saved her life more times than she could count. 6 years of partnership had taught her to read every subtle shift in his posture, every flick of his ears. The assignment brief had been simple: provide K-9 security sweeps during the crucial vote on Georgia's new anti-terrorism legislation. Senator Patricia Hawkins had specifically requested their unit after receiving anonymous threats about the session. Sarah and Max had worked similar details before: corporate boardrooms, federal buildings, even the governor's mansion during holiday parties. Chief Marcus Webb approached them, his security badge gleaming against his dark suit. "Collins, your team will position near the gallery entrance. Discreet surveillance only. These politicians get nervous around dogs." Sarah nodded, though something in Webb's tone struck her as odd. In 6 years of high-security details, she'd never been told to keep Max inconspicuous. Dogs were deterrents. Visibility was usually the point. They moved through the Capitol's ornate corridors, past portraits of Georgia's governors and bronze plaques commemorating historic moments. Max walked in perfect heel position, his training evident in every measured step. Tourists and staffers gave them respectful distance, recognizing the authority that came with the K-9 unit. The Senate chamber buzzed with pre-session energy. Senators chatted in small groups while aides shuffled papers and checked phones. Sarah positioned herself near the marble pillar closest to the ventilation intake, giving Max a clear view of the entire chamber while maintaining their discreet profile. That's when Max's behavior shifted. His ears snapped to attention, rotating like satellite dishes toward the ornate ceiling. Sarah felt his muscles tense beneath her hand. Max had detected something that made his training protocols kick into high alert. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Max's nose lifted, testing the air with the precision of a sophisticated detection instrument. His breathing quickened, and Sarah recognized the subtle signs that preceded his alerts in drug busts and bomb searches. But this was different, more urgent. The session called to order, and senators took their seats. Senator Hawkins began her opening remarks about the importance of the anti-terrorism bill, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Max's agitation increased with each word. Then he started barking. Not the controlled, single-bark alert they'd trained for specific scenarios. This was continuous, insistent barking that echoed off the marble walls and mahogany panels like gunshots. Every head in the chamber turned toward them. Senator Hawkins stopped mid-sentence, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Max, quiet!" Sarah commanded, but her partner ignored her, something that had never happened in their 6 years together. Max planted his feet and barked louder, his gaze fixed on the ventilation grate above the senators' desks. His entire body vibrated with urgency, every instinct screaming that danger lurked where humans couldn't detect it. Webb appeared at Sarah's elbow, his face dark with anger. "Get that animal out of here." "Sir, he's never—" "Now, Collins!" Sarah's training warred with her instincts. Max was trying to tell her something critical, but protocol demanded obedience to superior officers. She clipped the leash to Max's harness, but he resisted, pulling toward the chamber's center, where senators sat in confused silence. "I'm sorry, Senator Hawkins," Webb called out, his voice carrying false authority. "Technical difficulties with our K-9 unit. We'll remove them immediately." As Sarah led Max toward the exit, she caught his eye. In that moment, she saw something that chilled her: fear. Not for himself, but for the people he was being forced to leave behind. The chamber doors closed behind them with a definitive thud, cutting off the resumed session. In the sudden quiet of the corridor, Max finally stopped barking, but his body remained coiled with tension. Sarah knelt beside him, studying his face. "What did you smell in there, boy?" Max whimpered, a sound she'd heard only once before, during a warehouse raid where they'd barely escaped a trap meant to kill them both. Her blood ran cold. Whatever Max had detected in that chamber was worth risking his career to warn about. And now they were locked outside, powerless to stop whatever was coming. The Atlanta PD parking garage felt like a tomb as Sarah slammed the patrol car door, the sound echoing off concrete walls. Max jumped out behind her, his tail between his legs. Not from shame, but from the tension radiating from his partner. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that matched Sarah's mood. Her radio crackled. "Unit 47, report to Captain Rodriguez immediately." Sarah's stomach dropped. In 6 years, she'd never been summoned to the captain's office after a mission. She looked down at Max, who sat perfectly still, his dark eyes reflecting the fluorescent glare. "We're in trouble, aren't we, boy?" Max's ears flicked forward, and he nudged her hand with his nose, his way of offering comfort when her stress levels spiked. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt endless. Sarah's mind raced through the events at the Capitol, trying to understand what had triggered Max's unprecedented behavior. He'd never disobeyed a direct command, never ignored her in a professional setting. Something in that chamber had overridden 6 years of intensive training. Captain Rodriguez's office door was already open when they arrived. Sarah knocked on the frame, and the grey-haired woman looked up from her computer screen, her expression unreadable. "Collins, sit." Sarah took the chair across from the desk, while Max settled at her feet, his body pressed against her legs. The captain's office smelled of coffee and old case files, familiar scents that usually comforted Sarah. Today, they felt oppressive. "Want to explain what happened at the Capitol?" Rodriguez asked, her voice deceptively calm. "Ma'am, Max exhibited unusual behavior that I've never seen before. He was trying to alert to something. He disrupted a legislative session, Collins. Made the department look like amateurs in front of state senators and media." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "With respect, Captain, Max doesn't make mistakes. If he was alerting, there was a reason." Rodriguez leaned back in her chair, studying Sarah with the calculating gaze that had made her one of the department's most respected commanders. "Chief Webb called personally, said your dog seemed unstable, and recommended psychiatric evaluation." "Psychiatric evaluation?" Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "Max is the most stable canine in the department. You've seen his record. I've seen his record and I've seen yours. That's why this is so concerning." Rodriguez pulled up a file on her computer. Perfect scores on every evaluation, commendations from 3 federal agencies, lives saved. "I know what you two can do." Sarah felt a spark of hope, but Rodriguez's next words extinguished it. "But political pressure is political pressure. Senator Hawkins' office is furious. The media's already running stories about disrupted democracy and uncontrolled police animals." Through the office window, Sarah could see the Atlanta skyline, the same view she'd admired during her first promotion ceremony. Now it felt like bars on a prison cell. "I need to know you can control your partner," Rodriguez continued. "This anti-terrorism bill vote is too important to risk another incident. Captain, Max has never embarrassed the department in front of the entire state legislature." Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. Max sensed her distress and shifted closer, his warm presence anchoring her. He was trying to protect those people. Protect them from what? Fresh air? The democratic process? The words stung because Sarah didn't have an answer. She only had instinct, the same instinct that had kept her alive through dozens of dangerous operations, the same instinct that told her Max had detected something critical in that chamber. Rodriguez closed the file and leaned forward. "I'm putting you both on desk duty pending a full evaluation. No field operations until we understand what triggered this behavior. Captain, please." The decision is final. Rodriguez's tone softened slightly. Sarah, you're one of our best. Don't let one bad day destroy 6 years of excellent work. Sarah stood, her legs feeling unsteady. Max rose beside her, his body language alert and protective. As they reached the door, Rodriguez called out, "Collins? For what it's worth, I hope you figure out what spooked him. Max doesn't panic without reason." The hallway outside Rodriguez's office buzzed with activity. Officers processing paperwork, phones ringing, the constant background noise of a busy precinct. Sarah felt isolated from it all, as if she and Max existed in a bubble of disgrace. Her partner, Detective Jim Morrison, approached, his face sympathetic. "Heard about the Capitol. Tough break. Jim, you know Max better than anyone. Have you ever seen him lose control?" Morrison shook his head. "Never. That dog saved my ass more times than I can count. If he was barking, something was wrong. Tell that to the brass." Morrison glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Look, I know you're off active duty, but if you need anything unofficially, you know where to find me." Sarah nodded, grateful for the support. As Morrison walked away, she looked down at Max, who was watching her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "You know something, don't you?" she whispered. "Something they're not ready to hear." Max's tail gave a subtle wag, not the enthusiastic gesture of a happy dog, but the measured response of a partner acknowledging a shared secret. Whatever he'd detected in that chamber was still out there, and Sarah was beginning to realize that disgrace might be the least of their problems. Sarah's apartment felt suffocating at 11 p.m., the walls closing in with each passing hour. Max paced restlessly across the hardwood floor, his nails clicking in an anxious rhythm that matched her racing thoughts. The official reprimand sat on her coffee table like an accusation, the departmental letterhead gleaming under the lamplight. "Recommended psychological evaluation for K9 Unit Max," she read aloud for the third time. "Effective immediately." Max stopped pacing and fixed her with a stare that seemed to pierce straight through her doubts. His ears were forward, alert, the same posture he'd maintained since leaving the Capitol 6 hours ago. He wasn't acting like a dog with psychological issues. He was acting like a cop who'd discovered something terrible and couldn't make anyone listen. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Saw the news. You okay?" The local news had picked up the story, running it under the headline, "Police Dog Disrupts Senate Session." The footage showed Max barking frantically while she struggled to control him, making them both look incompetent. What the cameras hadn't captured was the intelligence in Max's eyes, the calculated urgency of his warnings. "Screw it," Sarah muttered, grabbing her keys. "If they won't listen to you, maybe I will." Max's entire body language shifted, his tail coming up in a confident arc. He knew they were going back. The drive to the Capitol took 20 minutes through Atlanta's late-night traffic. Sarah parked 3 blocks away, choosing a spot that wouldn't appear on any security cameras. The building loomed against the night sky, its dome illuminated by floodlights that created stark shadows across the surrounding grounds. "This is probably career suicide," she told Max as they approached the service entrance. "But you've never been wrong before." Max's nose lifted, testing the night air. His breathing quickened as they got closer to the building, the same pattern she'd observed during their most dangerous operations. Whatever he'd detected earlier was still there. Sarah used her departmental access card to enter through the maintenance corridor, a route she'd memorized during their security briefings. The Capitol, after hours, felt completely different. Empty hallways that had buzzed with activity now echoed with the hollow sound of their footsteps. Max led the way, his nose working constantly as they navigated toward the Senate chamber. His body language grew more tense with each step, muscles coiled like springs ready to release. "Show me," Sarah whispered. They reached the chamber entrance, and Max immediately pulled toward the ventilation grate where he'd focused his attention earlier. Sarah followed, studying the ornate metalwork that had been installed during the building's 1889 construction. To her eyes, it looked identical to every other decorative element in the historic structure, but Max saw, or rather smelled, something else entirely. He sat directly beneath the grate and gave a single controlled bark, the sound Sarah had been waiting for all day, his formal alert signal. "There's something up there," she breathed, pieces clicking into place. Sarah pulled out her phone's flashlight and directed it upward. The beam illuminated the intricate metalwork, revealing shadows and spaces that weren't immediately obvious. Max whined softly, his eyes tracking her movement. She noticed it then, a section of the grate that didn't quite align with the rest, as if it had been recently disturbed. The metal showed subtle scratches around the mounting screws, fresh marks that stood out against the patina of age. "Someone's been here," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. Max's ears swiveled toward the corridor behind them. Footsteps echoed in the distance, measured and deliberate. Sarah killed her flashlight and pressed against the marble column, pulling Max close. Chief Webb appeared in the doorway, his figure silhouetted against the hallway lighting. He moved with the confidence of someone who belonged there, but something about his presence at midnight struck Sarah as wrong. "Thought I heard something," Webb muttered, scanning the chamber. Sarah held her breath, feeling Max's controlled tension beside her. Her partner remained perfectly still, his training overriding his instincts to alert. They watched Webb approach the ventilation grate, his movements purposeful rather than investigative. Webb pulled out a small device, some kind of electronic scanner, and ran it along the grate's perimeter. The device beeped softly, and Webb nodded with satisfaction. He made a brief phone call, his voice too low to make out words, then left as quietly as he'd arrived. Sarah waited 5 full minutes before moving. Max's body vibrated with suppressed energy, every instinct screaming that they'd witnessed something significant. "He's checking on something," Sarah whispered. "Something you detected." Max's nose worked the air again, and his alert posture intensified. Whatever was hidden in that ventilation system, it was still there, still dangerous. Sarah photographed the grate with her phone, capturing the fresh scratches and misaligned sections. The images might not mean anything to a casual observer, but combined with Max's consistent alerts, they painted a disturbing picture. As they prepared to leave, Max gave one final alert toward the grate, his message clear. The danger remained, and time was running out. Walking back to their car, Sarah felt the weight of impossible choices. She could report what they'd observed and risk being dismissed as a desperate officer trying to justify her dog's behavior. Or she could investigate further, knowing that each step took her deeper into territory that could end her career. Max looked up at her as they reached the car, his eyes reflecting the streetlights. In that gaze, she saw the same unwavering trust that had carried them through 6 years of partnership. "Tomorrow," she promised him. "Tomorrow we figure out what Webb's really protecting." Max's tail wagged once, a gesture of approval that told her everything she needed to know. Her instincts had never led her astray, and Max's instincts had never been wrong. Whatever was hidden in that Capitol building was worth the risk of everything they'd built together. The morning sun cast long shadows across Sarah's desk as she stared at the photographs from the previous night, her coffee growing cold beside a stack of incident reports she was supposed to be filing. Max lay at her feet, his breathing steady, but his eyes alert, tracking every movement in the precinct bullpen. Detective Morrison approached, glancing around before sliding into the chair across from her desk. "You look like hell, Collins. Didn't sleep much." Sarah minimized the photo window on her computer screen. "Jim, hypothetically, if you wanted to hide something in a building's ventilation system, what would you use?" Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Hypothetically. Depends what you're hiding. Drugs, maybe small weapons, though HVAC systems aren't great for long-term storage." "Why?" Before Sarah could answer, her phone rang. The caller ID made her stomach clench. "Chief Webb. Collins, I need you and your partner for a consultation. Building maintenance found some irregularities in the Capitol's air filtration system. Your expertise with detection work might be valuable." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What kind of irregularities?" "Better discussed in person. Can you be here in 30 minutes? The line went dead before Sarah could respond. She looked down at Max, who had lifted his head at the mention of the capital, his ears forward and alert. "That can't be a coincidence," Morrison said, having caught enough of the conversation. "No," Sarah agreed, grabbing her gear. "It definitely can't." 25 minutes later, Sarah and Max stood in the Capitol's maintenance basement, surrounded by the building's mechanical infrastructure. Chief Webb waited beside a ladder that led up into the ventilation shaft, his expression unreadable. "Maintenance crew found this during routine inspection," Webb said, gesturing to an open panel in the ductwork. "Thought you might want to take a look before we call in the bomb squad." Sarah's training kicked in automatically, but her mind raced with implications. "You think there's an explosive device?" "Just being cautious. Your dog seemed very interested in this area yesterday." Max's behavior immediately confirmed Sarah's worst fears. His nose lifted toward the open ventilation shaft, and his entire body went rigid with the controlled tension that preceded his explosive alerts. Every hair on his neck stood up. "Max is giving me a positive alert," Sarah reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Webb nodded grimly. "That's what I was afraid of." Sarah clipped Max's leash and approached the ladder. The shaft above them disappeared into darkness, but even from ground level, Max's reaction was unmistakable. Something was up there, something that had triggered his explosive detection training. "I need to get closer," Sarah said, testing the ladder's stability. "Absolutely not," Webb replied quickly. "Too dangerous until we know what we're dealing with." But Sarah was already climbing, Max's urgent whines echoing from below. 3 rungs up, she could see into the horizontal ductwork that ran toward the Senate chamber. Her flashlight beam revealed modern additions to the 19th century infrastructure, new brackets, fresh mounting hardware, and cables that definitely hadn't been there during the building's original construction. "Chief, there's definitely something up here," she called down. "Recent installations, electronic components." Max's barking intensified, the same frantic warnings he'd given the day before. Sarah aimed her flashlight deeper into the shaft and felt her world shift. Plastic explosives, enough to bring down half the building. The devices were sophisticated, professionally installed with timer mechanisms and what appeared to be remote detonation capabilities. Multiple charges positioned strategically along the ventilation route that fed directly into the Senate chamber. "Jesus Christ," Sarah breathed, nearly losing her grip on the ladder. She descended quickly, her hands shaking as she reached for her radio. "This is Unit 47. I need bomb disposal and federal backup at the Capitol immediately. We have confirmed explosive devices in the building's ventilation system." Webb's hand closed over her radio before she could transmit. Wait. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "Chief, there are enough explosives up there to kill everyone in the building." "I know." Webb's voice was calm, almost gentle. "That's exactly the point." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Max sensed the shift in tension and moved protectively between her and Webb, his lips pulling back in a silent snarl. "You knew," Sarah said, the pieces falling into horrible place. "Yesterday, when Max was alerting, you knew what was up there." Webb smiled, the expression cold and calculating. "Your dog has excellent instincts. Unfortunately, so do you." Sarah's hand moved toward her weapon, but Webb was faster, drawing his service pistol with practiced efficiency. "I really hoped it wouldn't come to this. You have an impressive record, Collins." "The anti-terrorism bill," Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. "You're going to kill senators to stop the vote." "I'm going to send a message about government overreach," Webb corrected. "Sometimes democracy needs a course correction." Max's growl deepened, his training warring with his protective instincts. Sarah could feel the coiled energy in his muscles, ready to attack on her command. "How many people are you planning to murder?" Sarah asked, playing for time while calculating distances and angles. "As many as it takes." Webb's finger moved to his radio. "This is Chief Webb. We have a situation in the basement. Officer Collins appears to be having another psychological episode with her animal. Sarah realized, with crystalline clarity, that she and Max had stumbled into something far bigger than a simple security threat. Webb wasn't just a corrupt official, he was a terrorist with institutional authority and a plan that was already in motion. Max looked up at her, waiting for the signal that would either save their lives or end their careers permanently. In his dark eyes, she saw the same unwavering trust that had carried them through 6 years of impossible situations. "Now, Max," she whispered, "attack!" Max launched himself at Webb with the lethal precision of 75 pounds of trained muscle and bone. The impact sent Webb's pistol flying across the concrete floor as both men crashed into a maze of pipes and electrical conduits. Sarah dove for the weapon, her fingers closing around the grip just as Webb threw Max off and scrambled for cover behind a massive boiler. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," Webb snarled, blood trickling from claw marks on his face. Sarah kept her weapon trained on his position while Max circled, ready for another attack. "I know you're planning to murder innocent people." "Innocent?" Webb laughed bitterly. "Those senators are voting to turn this country into a police state. Someone has to stop them." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. A police chief complaining about police states while planting bombs in government buildings. But she couldn't focus on Webb's twisted logic. The explosives were still active, and she had no idea how much time remained before detonation. Her mind raced back 3 years to another basement, another moment when trusting Max had meant the difference between life and death. The warehouse in East Atlanta had seemed empty when they'd entered, chasing leads on a drug trafficking ring. Sarah had been following standard protocol, moving methodically through each room while Max swept for narcotics. Then Max had stopped dead in the center of what appeared to be an abandoned office space. "What is it, boy?" she'd whispered. Max's ears had flattened against his head, and he'd backed toward the door with the kind of controlled retreat that meant immediate danger. Sarah had learned to read his body language like a second language, and every signal screamed, "Run!" She'd trusted him completely, following his lead toward the exit just as the floor beneath them exploded upward. The traffickers had booby-trapped the building, turning it into a death trap for law enforcement. Max's instincts had saved both their lives. Now, in another basement with another hidden threat, Sarah felt that same absolute trust flowing between them. "Max, watch!" she commanded, and her partner immediately positioned himself between Webb and the exit while she pulled out her phone. Webb emerged from behind the boiler, his hands raised, but his eyes calculating. "You're making a mistake, Collins. I'm trying to save this country." "By committing mass murder?" Sarah dialed emergency dispatch while keeping her weapon steady. "By preventing a vote that will strip away constitutional rights. That anti-terrorism bill gives the government unlimited surveillance powers, indefinite detention, warrantless searches. So you decided to prove how dangerous terrorists can be by becoming one yourself." Webb's face twisted with frustrated rage. "You don't understand. I've spent 30 years in law enforcement watching our freedoms erode. This bill is the final nail in the coffin of American liberty." Sarah's call connected. "This is Officer Collins, badge 4721. I'm in the Capitol basement with a confirmed terrorist threat. Multiple explosive devices discovered. I need bomb disposal, federal backup, and immediate evacuation of the building." "Collins, you're making the biggest mistake of your career," Webb warned. "No," Sarah replied, remembering every time Max's instincts had proven superior to human judgment. "The biggest mistake would be not trusting my partner." Max's low growl indicated he sensed movement from Webb, and Sarah tightened her grip on her weapon. The basement's mechanical systems hummed around them, a constant reminder that somewhere above, senators were preparing for a session that could end in catastrophe. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked. Webb smiled coldly. "Depends on whether the vote proceeds as scheduled. Remote detonation, among other triggers." Webb's hand moved slowly toward his pocket. "Timer backup, motion sensors, and a dead man's switch that activates if my heart stops beating." Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. Shooting Webb might trigger the very explosion she was trying to prevent. Max sensed her tension and moved closer, his presence anchoring her focus. Another memory surfaced. The night she'd first realized that Max understood her emotional state better than most humans. She'd been going through her divorce, sitting on her apartment floor at 2 a.m., wondering if she'd made the right choice joining the K9 unit. Max had appeared beside her without being called, resting his massive head in her lap. No words, no judgment, just steady presence that said, "We're partners, whatever comes." That night, she'd understood that their bond went beyond training or duty. Max had chosen her as much as she'd chosen him. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah said, her voice steady with newfound resolve. "You're going to tell me how to disarm those devices. And if I refuse, then Max and I will figure it out ourselves. We always do." Webb studied her face, seeming to recognize something implacable in her expression. "You really trust that animal more than your own command structure. That animal has never lied to me, never betrayed me, and never tried to murder innocent people for political gain." Sarah's finger rested lightly on the trigger. "So yeah, I trust him more than I trust you." Max's ears swiveled toward the stairwell above them. Footsteps echoed down, backup arriving, or more of Webb's conspirators. Sarah felt the familiar sensation of time compressing around critical decisions. "Last chance, Webb. How do we disarm them?" Webb's smile widened, revealing the face of a man who'd crossed lines he could never uncross. "We don't, Collins. They're not meant to be disarmed." The footsteps above grew louder, and Sarah realized she was about to discover whether help was coming, or if she and Max were about to face odds that would test their partnership beyond anything they'd ever survived. But as Max pressed against her leg, she felt the same unshakable certainty that had guided them through 3 years of dangerous operations. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The footsteps descending the basement stairs belonged to Detective Morrison and 2 FBI agents Sarah didn't recognize. Relief flooded through her as Morrison's familiar voice called out her location, but Max remained tense, his body language suggesting the danger hadn't passed. "Collins, what's your status?" Morrison appeared at the bottom of the stairs, weapon drawn, taking in the scene with practiced efficiency. "Suspect in custody, multiple explosive devices confirmed in the ventilation system," Sarah reported, keeping her gun trained on Webb. "Be advised, he claims to have a dead man's switch." The older FBI agent, a weathered man with silver hair, approached cautiously. "Agent Patterson, FBI, we got your call." His eyes swept the basement's maze of pipes and machinery. "How many devices are we talking about?" "I saw at least 6 from my position in the shaft," Sarah said. "All professionally installed with timer and remote capabilities." Webb remained silent, his expression shifting between defiance and calculation. Max watched him with the unwavering focus of a predator, ready to react to the slightest aggressive movement. Agent Patterson spoke into his radio. "Control, this is Patterson. Initiate emergency evacuation protocols for the Capitol building. All personnel out within 15 minutes. Evacuating won't solve the problem," Webb said quietly. "Those devices aren't going anywhere." "Then you're going to help us disarm them," Patterson replied. Webb shook his head. "You still don't understand. This isn't about today's vote. It's about every vote that comes after. The surveillance infrastructure, the detention powers, the erosion of constitutional protections. Someone has to draw a line." Sarah felt sick listening to Webb's rationalization. She'd worked with him for 2 years, respected his leadership, never suspected the extremist ideology lurking beneath his professional facade. "How many others are involved?" Morrison asked. "Enough." Webb's smile held no warmth. "You think this operation depends on one person. There are patriots throughout the system who understand what's at stake." Patterson's radio crackled with updates. "Capital evacuation at 60%. Bomb disposal en route. ETA 12 minutes. Max suddenly lifted his head, his ears rotating toward a sound Sarah couldn't detect. His nose worked the air, and his body language shifted from watchful to actively alert. "What is it, boy?" Sarah asked. Before Max could respond, the basement lights cut out, plunging them into absolute darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, casting eerie red shadows across the mechanical infrastructure. "That's not standard protocol," Patterson said grimly. Sarah's radio squawked with panicked voices. "Control, we're showing power anomalies throughout the building. Backup systems are engaging randomly." Webb laughed, the sound echoing off concrete walls. "Like I said, you think this depends on one person?" Max pressed against Sarah's leg, his low growl indicating multiple threats converging on their position. The dog's enhanced senses were picking up movement that human ears couldn't detect. "Someone's coming," Sarah warned, trusting Max's instincts completely. Patterson gestured for defensive positions. "Morrison, watch the stairs. Collins, maintain custody of the suspect." But Webb was already moving, diving behind a massive electrical panel as the basement filled with armed figures wearing tactical gear and night vision equipment. Muzzle flashes strobed in the emergency lighting as gunfire erupted from multiple positions. Sarah dropped behind a concrete support pillar, pulling Max with her. "Federal agents, stand down!" The response came in the form of automatic weapons fire that chipped concrete inches from her head. These weren't law enforcement officers. They were Webb's co-conspirators, moving with military precision to extract their leader. Max's training kicked in automatically. He could identify friend from foe by scent and movement patterns, information that gave Sarah critical advantages in the chaos of a firefight. 3 targets, north side, she called to Patterson, relying on Max's directional alerts. Patterson's return fire was precise and professional, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Morrison had taken cover behind the stairwell, effectively cut off from supporting their position. "Collins!" Webb's voice carried over the gunfire. "You have 30 seconds to surrender, or my associates trigger the devices remotely." Sarah's mind raced through impossible calculations. Surrender meant certain death, but continuing to resist might trigger an explosion that would kill hundreds of people in the building above. Max made the decision for her. The Belgian Malinois launched himself into the darkness with the silent efficiency that had made him legendary in the K9 unit. Sarah heard a scream, then the distinctive sound of automatic weapons hitting concrete floors. "Max is engaging targets," she reported to Patterson. "I'm moving to support." Using Max's attack as cover, Sarah advanced through the mechanical maze, her weapon ready and her trust in her partner absolute. She could hear Webb shouting orders to his men, but Max's presence had disrupted their formation and tactical advantage. A figure emerged from behind a boiler, rifle raised toward Max's position. Sarah's shot took him center mass before he could fire. "One down," she called. Patterson's voice came back grim. "Bomb disposal reports external interference with their equipment. Someone's jamming their communications." Sarah realized with growing horror that Webb's operation was more sophisticated than a simple terrorist attack. They were facing a coordinated assault on multiple fronts, designed to prevent any possibility of stopping the bombing. Max appeared beside her, his muzzle stained with blood, but his eyes alert and focused. Together, they had eliminated the immediate threat, but Sarah could hear more movement in the darkness above. "How many people are involved in this?" she asked the darkness, knowing that Webb's conspiracy reached deeper into the system than she'd imagined. Max's ears swiveled toward the ventilation shaft where the explosives waited, his message clear. Time was running out, and the real battle was just beginning. The gunfire had stopped, but the silence in the basement felt more ominous than the chaos that preceded it. Sarah crouched beside Max behind a concrete pillar, both of them breathing hard as emergency sirens wailed somewhere above. Agent Patterson's voice cut through the darkness from his position near the electrical panel. "Webb's gone, slipped out during the firefight." Sarah felt her stomach drop. A terrorist with intimate knowledge of Capitol security, loose in a building filled with explosive devices and evacuating personnel. "How many ways out of this basement?" "Too many," Morrison replied from the stairwell. "Service tunnels, maintenance corridors, emergency exits. This place is a maze." Max suddenly lifted his head, his nose working the air with intense concentration. His ears swiveled toward a section of wall that appeared solid, but Sarah had learned to trust his senses over her own eyes. "There's another way out," she said, following Max's focus. "Max is picking up a scent trail." Patterson approached their position, his flashlight beam revealing a maintenance panel that blended seamlessly with the surrounding concrete. Smart. Webb knows this building better than anyone. Sarah's radio crackled with urgent updates. "All units, evacuation at 90% completion. Bomb disposal, requesting immediate access to device locations." "Patterson to control," the FBI agent responded. "Suspect has escaped, but we have K9 tracking capability. Proceeding with pursuit." "Negative, Patterson. Building integrity is compromised. All personnel evacuate immediately." Sarah looked down at Max, whose body language screamed urgency. Every instinct told her that following protocol meant letting Webb escape to detonate his devices from a safe distance. "Sir, with respect, my dog is the only asset capable of tracking Webb through this building," she said into her radio. "We can't let him reach a safe detonation point." Before Patterson could respond, Sarah was moving, following Max through the hidden maintenance panel into a narrow service corridor that ran parallel to the building's main structure. The space felt like a tomb, with barely enough room for a person to move single file. Max moved with confident purpose through the darkness, his enhanced senses creating a map Sarah couldn't see but trusted completely. Behind her, she heard Patterson curse creatively before following with Morrison close behind. The corridor opened into a utility room filled with electrical switching equipment and communication cables, the building's central nervous system. Max immediately alerted toward a bank of computers that looked far more sophisticated than basic utility management. "This isn't standard building infrastructure," Patterson observed, studying the equipment. Sarah's blood chilled as she recognized some of the hardware. Surveillance systems. Webb's been monitoring everything. Security cameras, communication intercepts, probably access to every electronic system in the building. Morrison pointed to a series of cables that ran upward through the ceiling. "These connect to the ventilation system. He could trigger those devices from here." Max whined softly, his attention focused on a laptop that remained active despite the building's power fluctuations. The screen showed a complex schematic of the Capitol's layout, with red dots marking locations throughout the structure. "There are more devices," Sarah breathed, counting at least 15 markers. "Way more than what I saw in the ventilation shaft." Patterson leaned over the laptop, his face grim. "This isn't just about stopping a vote. Webb's planning to bring down the entire building." The laptop screen flickered and a new window opened showing a timer, 47 minutes and counting. "Remote detonation sequence activated," Morrison read from the display. "Jesus, we've got less than an hour." Sarah studied the schematic, trying to understand Webb's strategy. The device placement followed the building's structural supports, designed for maximum architectural damage rather than targeted elimination of specific individuals. "He's not trying to send a political message," she realized. "He wants to destroy the seat of state government entirely." Max's ears suddenly flattened against his head, and he backed away from the computer equipment with the controlled retreat that meant immediate danger. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. "Move, now!" They scrambled toward the corridor exit as the laptop screen flashed red warnings. "Intrusion detected, security protocol activated." The utility room erupted in sparks and smoke as Webb's booby traps engaged, destroying evidence and nearly killing anyone who discovered his command center. Sarah felt the heat singe her hair as they dove through the narrow opening. "Son of a bitch knew we'd find this place," Patterson coughed, wiping smoke from his eyes. But Max was already moving again, following Webb's scent trail deeper into the building's hidden infrastructure. His focused determination told Sarah that they were closing the distance between themselves and their target. The corridor branched into multiple directions, each leading to different sections of the Capitol complex. Max chose the path toward the building center without hesitation, his nose guiding them through a labyrinth that would have been impossible to navigate without his tracking abilities. "Where's he going?" Morrison asked. Sarah studied their direction and felt pieces click into place. The Senate chamber. He's not running, he's going back to ground zero. They emerged into a familiar hallway, and Sarah realized they were directly beneath the chamber where this nightmare had started. Max's body language shifted from tracking mode to the coiled tension that preceded engagement with a dangerous suspect. "He's close," Sarah whispered. Above them, through the ornate ceiling, came the sound of a single person moving with careful purpose. Webb was in the chamber where tomorrow's session was scheduled to begin, where senators would vote on legislation that he believed threatened American freedom. Max looked up at Sarah with eyes that held absolute trust and readiness for whatever came next. In that gaze, she saw the reflection of her own determination to stop a man who had perverted everything law enforcement was supposed to represent. "Time to end this," she whispered, and Max's tail gave a single, confident wag that said he was ready for anything. Sarah pressed her ear against the marble floor, listening to Webb's movements in the chamber above. The sound of his footsteps suggested he was working methodically around the room's perimeter, likely making final adjustments to devices they hadn't yet discovered. Max lay beside her, every muscle coiled with predatory focus. His breathing was controlled and silent, the breathing of a hunting animal preparing to strike. "Access point," Patterson whispered. Sarah pointed to a maintenance hatch she'd noticed during their original security sweep. "Service ladder leads directly into the chamber, but he'll see us coming." "Not necessarily," Morrison said, studying the building's architectural plans on his phone. "There's a second access through the old dumbwaiter system. Comes up behind the speaker's podium." The plan was simple and desperate. Sarah and Max would create a distraction through the main access while Patterson flanked through the dumbwaiter. But as they prepared to move, voices echoed from the chamber above. Webb wasn't alone. "Timelines accelerated," Webb was saying. "Federal response is faster than we anticipated." Another voice responded, one that made Sarah's blood freeze. "Captain Rodriguez. The evacuation bought us time, but not much," Rodriguez replied. "Are the charges ready?" Sarah felt the world shift beneath her as the implications hit home. Her own captain, the woman who'd built her career, who'd assigned her to the Capitol detail, who'd expressed concern about Max's behavior, was part of Webb's conspiracy. Patterson's expression mirrored her shock. A terrorist cell within law enforcement was every federal agent's nightmare scenario. "Device placement is complete," Webb continued. "Structural charges will bring down the entire South Wing. The symbolism will be perfect. Georgia's government buried under the weight of its own tyranny." "And the K-9 officer?" Rodriguez asked. Webb's laugh was cold. "Collins and her dog served their purpose. Their discovery of the devices will be blamed for triggering premature detonation. Tragic accident during a terrorist investigation." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. They'd been manipulated from the beginning. Webb had used Max's legitimate alert as cover for his own operation, planning to frame them for the very bombing they were trying to prevent. Max sensed her emotional shift and pressed closer, his presence anchoring her focus. Whatever personal betrayal she felt, hundreds of lives still hung in the balance. The conversation above revealed more details about the conspiracy's scope. Rodriguez had been feeding Webb intelligence for months, identifying security weaknesses and ensuring that today's session would proceed despite terrorist threats. Other conspirators were positioned throughout Atlanta's law enforcement community, ready to misdirect federal response. "How long have you been planning this?" Rodriguez asked. 3 years, Webb replied, "ever since the first version of this anti-terrorism bill was introduced. I've watched constitutional protections erode piece by piece, and I decided someone had to take a stand." Sarah realized the horrifying irony. Webb genuinely believed he was a patriot defending American freedom, even as he planned mass murder to achieve his goals. In his twisted worldview, killing state senators was a heroic act of resistance against tyranny. "Marcus," Rodriguez said, her voice carrying genuine affection, "after today there's no going back." There was no going back the moment we started," Webb replied. "Liberty requires sacrifice." Sarah looked at Patterson and Morrison, seeing her own grim determination reflected in their faces. They were facing not just terrorists, but ideological extremists who believed their cause justified any atrocity. Max suddenly lifted his head, his ears swiveling toward a new sound from above, the mechanical hum of electronic equipment activating. The final timer sequence was beginning. "Charges are armed," Webb announced. 37 minutes until detonation. Sarah's radio crackled with urgent updates from the outside. Bomb disposal teams in position, but remote jamming is preventing communication with devices, unable to determine deactivation procedures. She realized that Webb's technical sophistication extended beyond simple explosives. He'd created a system specifically designed to prevent bomb disposal experts from stopping the attack. "We're the only ones who can stop this," she whispered to Patterson. The FBI agent nodded grimly. "Your move, Collins." Sarah looked down at Max, whose dark eyes held the same unwavering trust that had carried them through 6 years of impossible situations. But this time, they weren't just facing criminals. They were facing corruption that reached into the heart of law enforcement itself. Above them, Webb and Rodriguez continued planning the final phase of their operation, unaware that their conversation had revealed the full scope of their betrayal. Sarah felt rage building in her chest, not just at the planned murders, but at the perversion of everything she'd devoted her career to protecting. "Rodriguez assigned us to this detail," she whispered, understanding the final piece of Webb's strategy. She knew Max would alert to the devices. She wanted us here. As scapegoats," Patterson agreed. "Wrong," Sarah said, steel entering her voice. "As witnesses." She keyed her radio for emergency broadcast. "All units, this is Officer Collins. Captain Rodriguez is compromised. Repeat, Captain Rodriguez is working with the bombing suspects. Do not trust any orders from her position." Above them, the conversation stopped abruptly. Then Rodriguez's voice, cold and deadly. "We have a problem." Max's lips pulled back in a silent snarl as footsteps approached their position. The final confrontation was beginning, and Sarah realized that surviving would require her to fight not just terrorists, but the corrupt system that had created them. "Ready, partner?" she whispered. Max's tail gave a single, confident wag that said he was ready for anything, even betrayal from within their own ranks. The maintenance hatch above their heads exploded inward as Rodriguez dropped through the opening, her service weapon already drawn and aimed at Sarah's position. The captain's face was a mask of cold determination, all pretense of loyalty stripped away. "Should have minded your own business, Collins," Rodriguez said, her voice carrying the weight of betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. Sarah rolled behind a concrete support beam as gunfire erupted, pulling Max with her. The basement corridor became a killing field as Patterson returned fire from his position near the electrical panel. The confined space amplified every shot into deafening thunder that reverberated off the marble walls. "Where's Webb?" Patterson shouted over the gunfire. "Still upstairs," Rodriguez called back, ejecting an empty magazine with practiced efficiency. "Finishing what we started." Max's ears flattened against the noise, but his focus remained laser-sharp on Rodriguez's position. Sarah could feel the coiled energy in his muscles. He was waiting for the command that would turn him from a tracking dog into a weapon. "How many others?" Sarah demanded, knowing that Rodriguez and Webb couldn't have orchestrated this operation alone. "Enough to finish the job," Rodriguez replied, reloading with movements that spoke of extensive tactical training. "You think 2 people could plan something this sophisticated?" A new voice echoed from the chamber above. "Rodriguez, status report." Sarah recognized the voice. Detective Barnes from Internal Affairs, a man she'd trusted with her career evaluations. The conspiracy reached deeper into Atlanta PD than she'd imagined, corrupting officers at every level of command. "Situation contained," Rodriguez called upward, proceeding with final phase. Patterson's radio crackled with updates from outside. Federal teams report continued electronic interference, unable to establish communication with bomb disposal units. Sarah realized with growing horror that Webb's people weren't just planning to trigger the explosives. They were ensuring that no one could stop them. The jamming equipment was sophisticated enough to disrupt federal communications, creating a dead zone around the Capitol. "Time?" she asked. Patterson checked his watch. 28 minutes. Rodriguez laughed, the sound echoing off concrete walls. "Even if you kill me, Collins, the devices are automated now. Nothing can stop them." "Watch me," Sarah muttered, then made a decision that went against every tactical principle she'd ever learned. She stepped into the open, her weapon trained on Rodriguez. "Let's finish this." Rodriguez's surprise lasted exactly 1 second before her training kicked in. Both women fired simultaneously, muzzle flashes strobing in the basement's emergency lighting. Sarah felt the bullet graze her shoulder as she dove for cover, but her shot had found its mark. Rodriguez stumbled backward, blood spreading across her tactical vest. Her weapon clattered to the floor as she collapsed against the wall, her breathing labored but her eyes still defiant. "You don't understand what you've done," Rodriguez gasped. "This bill will turn America into a surveillance state. We're patriots. You're terrorists." Sarah cut her off, applying pressure to her own wound while keeping her weapon ready. Max approached Rodriguez carefully, his training allowing him to distinguish between a neutralized threat and an active danger. The captain was dying, but her radio remained active, transmitting their conversation to Webb and his remaining conspirators. "Collins is still alive," Rodriguez whispered into her radio with her final breath. "Adjust timeline." The response came immediately. "Understood. Initiating immediate detonation sequence." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Webb was accelerating the bombing, willing to sacrifice the tactical advantage of a planned schedule to ensure that she and Max couldn't interfere further. Patterson was already moving, following the service ladder upward toward the chamber. "We've got minutes, not hours." Sarah looked down at Max, whose dark eyes reflected her own desperate determination. They'd eliminated Rodriguez, but Webb remained in control of enough explosive devices to level the building. More importantly, he had the technical expertise to trigger them remotely, even if they managed to reach him. "Can you track him?" she asked Max. Max's nose lifted toward the chamber above, testing air currents that carried scent information invisible to human senses. His body language shifted to the focused intensity that preceded his most dangerous operations. Together, they climbed toward the chamber where this nightmare had begun, knowing that they were walking into a trap designed by people who knew their capabilities intimately. But Sarah felt the same unshakable confidence that had carried them through 6 years of impossible situations. Webb might have superior numbers, better equipment, and the advantage of preparation. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated the bond between a K-9 officer and her partner. Max reached the chamber first, his silent movement providing intelligence about Webb's position. Through hand signals that had become second nature, he communicated that 2 targets remained in the room, Webb and Barnes, both armed and positioned near the device control systems. Sarah felt time compressing around the moment of truth. Everything she'd learned about police work, everything she'd built with Max, everything she believed about justice and duty, came down to the next few minutes. "Ready?" she whispered. Max's response was the low growl of a predator preparing to protect his pack. Whatever happened next, they would face it as partners, trusting each other completely in a world where trust had become the rarest and most valuable commodity. Above them, Webb's voice carried through the chamber's acoustics. 10 minutes to detonation. Time to send our message to the world." Sarah checked her weapon one final time and prepared to show Webb exactly what kind of message she intended to send back. Sarah emerged from the maintenance hatch into the Senate chamber's familiar grandeur, but the ornate space had been transformed into a terrorist's workshop. Laptop computers lined the senators' desks, their screens displaying countdown timers and building schematics. Cables snaked across the marble floor, connecting to devices that pulsed with malevolent electronic life. Webb stood behind the speaker's podium like a twisted version of a government official, his hands dancing across a tablet that controlled the entire network. Detective Barnes crouched near the main entrance, his weapon trained on Sarah's position, while his free hand worked a radio jammer. 8 minutes, Collins, Webb called out without looking up from his tablet. Just enough time for you to understand what you've failed to stop. Max moved like a shadow along the chamber's perimeter, using the ornate columns and mahogany furniture for cover. His training allowed him to approach targets silently. But Sarah could see the calculations in his movements. He was assessing angles, distances, and threat priorities with the precision of a four-legged tactical computer. "The FBI's outside," Sarah said, keeping her weapon trained on Webb while tracking Barnes's position. "This building is surrounded." "The FBI can't stop remote detonation," Webb replied, his fingers never pausing on the tablet. "Even if they breach the chamber, the devices are hardwired to trigger if this control system is damaged." Sarah felt her heart sink. Webb had created a dead man's switch on a massive scale. Any attempt to stop him would trigger the very explosion he was threatening to cause. "But you can," Webb continued, finally looking up with eyes that held the fervor of a true believer. "Call off the federal response. Order them to withdraw beyond the blast radius. Let me complete the mission. Your mission is mass murder. My mission is preventing the death of American freedom." Webb's voice carried the conviction of someone who'd crossed moral lines so far that he could no longer see them. "This anti-terrorism bill will create a surveillance state that would make Orwell weep. Sometimes democracy must be defended with blood." Barnes spoke up from his position near the entrance. "Sarah, you know me. I'm not a terrorist. I'm a cop who's watched our constitutional rights disappear, one law at a time." Sarah recognized the genuine pain in Barnes's voice, the same frustration that drove many law enforcement officers to question government overreach. But somewhere along the way, legitimate concerns had been twisted into justification for atrocity. "There are legal ways to fight bad legislation," she replied. "We tried legal ways," Webb said, his tablet showing 6 minutes and counting. "Letters to representatives, public protests, court challenges, all ignored while the surveillance state expanded. This is the only language they understand." Max had reached a position behind Barnes, invisible to everyone except Sarah. Her partner's eyes met hers across the chamber, and she saw the same unshakable trust that had carried them through 6 years of impossible situations. "What's your endgame, Webb?" Sarah asked, playing for time, while Max positioned himself for optimal impact. "You blow up the Capitol, kill innocent people, and then what? The government rebuilds, passes even more restrictive laws, and you've accomplished nothing except proving their point about terrorist threats." For the first time, doubt flickered across Webb's face. "Martyrdom inspires resistance. Others will follow our example. Others will follow your example of murdering cops and civilians? That's your legacy?" Webb's hands hesitated on the tablet, and Sarah saw her opening. She gave Max the subtlest of hand signals, a gesture that meant neutralize threat, non-lethal if possible. Max exploded into motion with the silent efficiency that had made him legendary in the K-9 unit. Barnes had perhaps 1 second to register the shadow moving behind him before 75 pounds of trained muscle drove him to the floor. His weapon spun away across the marble as Max's jaws clamped down on his wrist with precisely calibrated pressure. Webb spun toward the commotion, his finger hovering over the tablet's detonation control. "Call him off, or I trigger everything now." "You trigger it, you die with everyone else," Sarah pointed out, her weapon trained on Webb's center mass. "I was always prepared to die for this cause," Webb replied, but his voice carried less conviction than before. Sarah's radio crackled with Patterson's voice from outside. "Collins, Federal Bomb Disposal has identified a possible override frequency. Can you access the control system?" Webb heard the transmission and smiled coldly. "They're too late. The devices are already armed." But Sarah had noticed something Webb hadn't. Max's keen nose was working the air near the control equipment, and his body language suggested he'd detected something significant. "Max, alert!" she commanded. Max released Barnes and moved to the laptop array, his nose leading him to a specific device that looked identical to the others but carried a scent signature that distinguished it from the rest. Primary control unit, Sarah realized. Max can smell the difference in the electronics. Webb's confidence cracked as he understood the implications. Even if you destroy the controller, the backup timers will give us enough time for bomb disposal to work, Sarah finished. Game over, Webb. The corrupt police chief's face cycled through rage, desperation, and finally resignation as he realized his carefully planned operation was unraveling. But desperate men with nothing to lose were the most dangerous enemies of all. "If I can't send my message one way," Webb snarled, raising the tablet above his head, "I'll send it another." He brought the device down toward the marble floor with enough force to shatter it and trigger every explosive in the building simultaneously. Sarah's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him away from the control system. The tablet flew from his hands, sliding across the chamber floor toward Max's position. "Max, secure!" Her partner's jaws closed gently around the device, his training allowing him to handle evidence without damaging critical components. The countdown continued, but Webb's ability to trigger immediate detonation was neutralized. 4 minutes, Sarah breathed, looking at the timer display. "We need federal bomb disposal in here now." The chamber doors burst open as FBI bomb disposal specialists flooded in, their equipment cases clattering against marble floors, while Sarah maintained her weapon trained on the wounded Webb. Max sat perfectly still, the control tablet cradled gently in his jaws like the most important evidence of his career. 3 minutes, 40 seconds, Agent Patterson announced, his team already connecting diagnostic equipment to Webb's laptop array. "Sarah, we need access to that tablet." "Max, release!" Sarah commanded. Her partner placed the device carefully on the floor beside Patterson's feet, his training overriding every instinct to protect critical evidence from strangers. The lead bomb technician, a woman with steady hands and intense concentration, began analyzing the tablet's interface. "Encryption's military grade," she reported. "We need the password." All eyes turned to Webb, who sat propped against the speaker's podium, blood seeping through his shirt from Sarah's shoulder shot. His face held the serene expression of a martyr prepared for death. "Go to hell," he said simply. "Webb, there are still people in this building," Sarah said, kneeling beside him. "Maintenance workers, security guards, people who have nothing to do with your political grievances. Collateral damage in the war for freedom," Webb replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Max approached Webb slowly, his body language shifting from tactical alertness to something Sarah had seen only rarely, the demeanor he showed toward wounded suspects who were no longer threats. The dog's intelligence allowed him to distinguish between dangerous enemies and broken humans. "Even your dog knows it's over," Patterson observed. 2 minutes, 30 seconds, the bomb technician called out. "I can bypass some of the encryption, but not all of it. We need that password." Barnes, his wrist wrapped in Max's bite marks, spoke from his position on the floor. "Marcus, enough people have died. Rodriguez is gone. The operation failed. Don't make it meaningless." Webb's eyes flickered toward his former partner, and Sarah saw cracks forming in his ideological armor. Patricia believed in the cause. "Ah, Patricia believed in you," Barnes corrected. "Don't dishonor her memory with more innocent blood." Sarah felt time compressing around the moment of truth. Webb's psychological profile suggested a man who genuinely believed in his cause, but who'd been driven to extremism by desperation rather than inherent evil. If she could reach the part of him that remembered being a cop, being someone who protected rather than destroyed. "Chief Webb," she said, using his title deliberately. "You spent 30 years in law enforcement. How many lives did you save in that time?" Webb's eyes met hers, and she saw flickers of the man he'd been before extremism consumed him. "Hundreds, maybe thousands. Then save them now. Give us the password." 1 minute, 40 seconds, the technician announced, her voice tight with controlled panic. Webb closed his eyes, his breathing labored from blood loss and emotional exhaustion. The password is Constitution 1787. The bomb technician's fingers flew across the tablet's interface, bypassing security protocols with professional efficiency. Her equipment beeped rapidly as she accessed the detonation network. "I'm in," she announced. "Disarming primary charges, secondary charges, backup timers." Sarah held her breath as red indicators on the laptop screens began switching to green, one by one. Max pressed against her leg, his presence anchoring her focus while chaos swirled around them. 43 seconds, Patterson called out. "Almost there," the technician replied, sweat beading on her forehead. Last sequence. The timer hit 30 seconds, then 20, then 10. Sarah found herself counting down with the display, each number bringing them closer to either salvation or catastrophe. 5, 4, 3, 2. Every screen in the chamber flashed green simultaneously as the final charge was disarmed. The countdown timers stopped at 0:01, frozen forever at the moment between destruction and deliverance. "All devices neutralized," the technician announced, her voice shaking with relief. "Building is secure." Sarah felt her knees give out as 6 hours of sustained adrenaline finally caught up with her. She sat heavily on the marble floor, her wounded shoulder throbbing, while Max positioned himself protectively beside her. Webb looked up at her with eyes that seemed ancient. "You know this won't end here. The surveillance state will still expand. Constitutional protections will still erode. We'll just find other ways to resist." "Maybe," Sarah replied, "but you won't be part of it." Patterson was already coordinating with federal teams outside, ensuring that every device in the building was located and safely removed. The operation that had begun with Max's barking in this very chamber was finally ending with the sound of handcuffs clicking around Webb's wrists. "Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for terrorism, conspiracy to commit murder, and violations of the Patriot Act," Patterson recited. "Ironic, considering your feelings about that legislation." Barnes was also taken into custody, his career in law enforcement ending in the same chamber where he'd once sworn to uphold justice. Sarah watched her former colleagues led away in restraints, feeling the weight of betrayal that would take years to fully process. Max nudged her hand with his nose, drawing her attention back to the present moment. In his dark eyes, she saw the same unwavering loyalty that had carried them through 6 years of partnership and brought them safely through their most dangerous operation. "Good boy," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Very good boy." Outside, she could hear the sounds of normalcy returning, emergency vehicles departing, federal agents coordinating cleanup operations, the Capitol building being prepared for tomorrow's session that would now proceed as scheduled. The anti-terrorism bill would come to a vote as planned, though the irony of the timing wasn't lost on anyone involved. Webb's extremist actions had provided the most compelling argument possible for the legislation he'd tried to prevent. Sarah looked around the chamber where American democracy had nearly died, then down at Max, who had saved it with nothing more than his keen nose and unwavering instincts. "Ready to go home, partner?" she asked. Max's tail wagged once, a gesture of agreement that said their work here was finished, and it was time to return to the simpler missions that didn't require them to fight corruption within their own ranks. Together, they walked out of the chamber and into a future where their bond had been tested by fire and proven unbreakable. 24 hours after the Capitol bombing plot was thwarted, Sarah stood on the building's front steps beside Agent Patterson, her arm in a sling, but her posture straight and professional. Max sat at perfect attention beside her, his tactical harness gleaming in the afternoon sun, while news cameras captured every angle. FBI Director Catherine Morrison approached the podium, her expression reflecting the gravity of what had nearly occurred. Behind her, the Capitol dome rose against a cloudless Georgia sky, its limestone facade showing no signs of the destruction that had been averted by minutes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Director Morrison began. Yesterday, this building and everyone in it were saved by the exceptional police work of Officer Sarah Collins and her K-9 partner Max from the Atlanta Police Department. The assembled crowd of reporters, federal agents, and state officials listened intently as Morrison outlined the scope of the conspiracy that had been uncovered. Marcus Webb, Patricia Rodriguez, and Detective Barnes were in federal custody, along with 6 other conspirators from various law enforcement agencies across Georgia. The plot involved 15 explosive devices positioned throughout the Capitol's infrastructure. Morrison continued. If detonated, these devices would have caused catastrophic structural damage and massive loss of life. Officer Collins and Max identified the threat, tracked the suspects through the building's service areas, and provided critical intelligence that allowed federal bomb disposal teams to neutralize the devices. Sarah felt the weight of cameras focused on her, but her attention remained on Max, whose calm demeanor showed no awareness that he was the center of national attention. To him, this was simply another day with his partner, another mission completed successfully. Captain Maria Santos, Rodriguez's replacement as head of the K-9 unit, stepped forward to join Sarah at the podium. Santos had been brought in from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation specifically to rebuild trust within Atlanta PD's command structure. Officer Collins, Santos said, your actions yesterday exemplify the highest standards of law enforcement. By trusting your partner's instincts and following the evidence despite institutional pressure, you prevented one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in Georgia's history. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Max had been expelled from this very building for barking, the same barking that had detected explosives capable of killing hundreds of people. Senator Patricia Hawkins, whose anti-terrorism bill had been the target of Webb's plot, approached the microphone. Her voice carried genuine emotion as she addressed Sarah directly. Officer Collins, when your K-9 partner disrupted our session 2 days ago, I was embarrassed and angry. I demanded your removal from the building. Hawkins paused, her composure wavering slightly. I've since learned that Max was trying to save our lives. His behavior wasn't disruptive, it was heroic. The senator turned to address Max directly, her formal demeanor softening. Max, I owe you an apology, and a debt that can never be repaid. Max's tail gave a subtle wag, as if acknowledging the senator's words, though Sarah knew he was simply responding to the positive tone of voice rather than understanding the content. Director Morrison returned to the podium for the ceremony's culmination. It is my honor to present Officer Sarah Collins and K-9 Max with the FBI's Medal of Valor, recognizing extraordinary heroism in the line of duty. As the medal was placed around Sarah's neck, she felt the weight of validation for every decision she'd made during the crisis. More importantly, she felt vindication for her absolute trust in Max's abilities. A reporter called out from the crowd, Officer Collins, what made you decide to investigate further after being ordered to leave the building? Sarah considered her response carefully, aware that her words would be quoted in news stories across the country. Max has never been wrong about a threat. In 6 years of partnership, his instincts have been perfect. When he was telling me something was wrong, I had 2 choices: trust the bureaucracy or trust my partner. I chose my partner. Another reporter, what's next for you and Max? We go back to work, Sarah replied simply. There are always more cases, more people who need protection. That's what we do. The formal ceremony concluded with photographs and brief interviews, but Sarah's focus remained on Max throughout. He'd performed flawlessly under pressure, adapted to changing circumstances, and ultimately saved hundreds of lives. Yet he showed no awareness of his heroic status. He was simply a dog who'd done his job with the partner he trusted. As the crowd dispersed, Agent Patterson approached for a private conversation. Sarah, the Bureau would like to offer you a position with our counter-terrorism task force. Your experience with this case would be invaluable. Sarah looked down at Max, whose dark eyes reflected patient attention. Federal work would mean travel, different assignments, disruption to our routine. The offer extends to both of you, Patterson clarified. We need teams with your capabilities. Sarah felt honored by the invitation, but her decision was immediate. Thank you, but we belong in Atlanta. This is our city. These are our people. Max and I work best when we're protecting our own community. Patterson nodded with understanding. If you ever change your mind, the offer stands. As they walked back to their patrol car, Sarah reflected on the events that had transformed them from disgraced officers to national heroes in less than 48 hours. The experience had tested their partnership in ways she'd never imagined, forcing her to choose between institutional authority and personal trust. The choice had been easier than expected. In a world where corruption could reach the highest levels of law enforcement, where ideology could twist good people into monsters, the one constant had been Max's unwavering loyalty and infallible instincts. "What do you think, boy?" she asked as they reached their vehicle. "Ready for whatever comes next?" Max's response was the enthusiastic tail wag of a dog who understood that their partnership had been forged in crisis and proven unbreakable. Whatever challenges awaited them in Atlanta's streets, they would face them together with the absolute trust that had saved hundreds of lives and preserved the democratic process. Sarah opened the car door, and Max jumped into his familiar position in the back seat, ready for their next call, their next case, their next opportunity to serve and protect. The medal around Sarah's neck caught the afternoon light, but the real reward was the continued partnership with the most loyal, intelligent, and heroic partner she could ever imagine. Together, they drove back into the city they'd sworn to protect, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring.